2018 was an amazing year for PSVR. There are bound to be some disappointments. I've played a decent amount of the PSVR games that released this year, but I haven't played everything. So I worked together with Evasion to discuss our most disappointing games of last year. Some of these games aren't bad games, but they just didn't live up to our expectations. So let's get into it. Bravo Team. On March 6th, I picked up a game that I was very excited for. This game was Bravo Team. I got home, played it, beat it in one sitting, and never touched it again. I was massively disappointed. After Supermassive Games' previous beloved VR title, Until Dawn Rush of Blood, a lot of players were excited to see what they could do with the shooter, especially because it took advantage of the aim controller. What we were left with was a repetitive and boring shooter, and the price tag was way too high.
Ark Park. This game was set to be the experience of a lifetime. The chance to walk within the horrifyingly glorious gates of Jurassic Park for the first time in VR caught the attention of so many of us when the initial game trailers were released. What we got was not only a complete disappointment from what we were made to believe, it was also completely overpriced in all its buggy glory. Sure, it's been patched several times since then, with many issues fixed, but the one issue that would need to be fixed to make this game worth playing still remains, and that's the game itself.
Salaryman Escape. Oasis Games is a VR publisher that has put out several titles. I'm a big fan of their simple but fun pixel gear, so when I saw the trailer for Salaryman Escape, with interesting visuals, catchy music, and unique level designs, I was excited. But while playing the game, I came across multiple issues with the physics, where if things wouldn't line up perfectly, it didn't work. This was a big problem because most of the levels revolve around block physics. So for multiple levels, if I messed up, I had to completely replay it, even if it looked totally possible. Now don't get me wrong, Salaryman Escape is still a good game, and it's had a lot of patches since then. But when I played it, the issues held it back from being as good as I hoped.
Evasion. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with me here, but while keeping in mind that this list is about the biggest disappointments in 2018, I felt it necessary for Evasion to be here. Now I want to be clear, there is definitely a workable game here, and many people enjoyed what Evasion had to offer. The issues that I found with Evasion were more related to what we were promised versus what we got. The trailers boast a high-action, Farpoint-esque shooter adding co-op to the main campaign and some fun and interesting special ability mechanics. The problem was, there didn't seem to be much more than those bells and whistles to the game. The story was lacking heavily, variation in enemies was limited and unsatisfying, and the special abilities were not as shiny and new as we had thought. Couple all this with a $40 price tag, and this is easily a letdown in my book.
Torn. I love adventure games like Apex, Construct, and Red Matter. So when I saw the trailers for Torn, I got excited. It showed multiple unique environments and a mysterious story. This alone had me excited. And while the story and environments in Torn were great, the gameplay was not. It has you grabbing objects in each room of the mansion to connect circuits. I enjoyed these puzzles at the beginning, but after realizing that the whole game was the same exact puzzles repeating over and over, I was really disappointed. The story made playing through the game worth it, but the gameplay held it back from being as good as I hoped it would be.
The Inpatient. The Inpatient was a horror title we were excited to see hit the PSVR in 2018. It had a AAA look along with a near AAA price tag and was an exciting new addition to the Until Dawn franchise. The look and feel of this game from its trailers seemed to show that this is one of the higher production value games that we were going to see in PSVR to date, and anticipation for it grew steadily. The problems came as soon as you enter the reality. The game mechanics are okay at best, but what made for true disappointment with the Inpatient was the limitations when interacting with the world around you. Top it off with minimal scares, a drawn-out and generally unengaging story, and you're left with an okay-ish mystery story experience with a AAA price tag. Keep in mind, it's not to say there isn't something here, it's just not what it was made out to be.
Dream Match Tennis. Surprisingly, we only have one PSVR tennis game, which is Dream Match Tennis. And unlike some of the other games on the list, this game is actually really good. The tennis mechanics are spot on, and it's really fun to play. But it was disappointing because it lacks multiplayer, which is what everyone was hoping for from a tennis game. Multiplayer would make this a must-have game. It's still really good, but not the best it could be.
Code 51 Mecha Arena. When Code 51 was first announced, it seemed like the PvP Mech Arena style shooter many of us were waiting for. The gameplay was fast-paced and well executed, and the multiplayer seemed like it would boast some real replay value. Sadly, Code 51's release was rocky at best. With only a small handful of maps, no campaign, only one game mode, not to mention poor sound design, settings marked as soon to be added, this game was a mess. Since release, however, the game has improved significantly, though the game still just doesn't seem to live up to its initial hype. The initial release seemed to leave a bad taste in a large margin of players' mouths, causing the game to suffer from a lack of player base as well. There's a game here, but the early release of this title may have been the nail in the coffin of this obviously unfinished and not ready for retail game.
Roller Coaster Tycoon Joyride. I am very passionate about the Roller Coaster Tycoon series, and the same goes for PSVR. So when I heard that a PSVR Roller Coaster Tycoon game was coming out, I was excited, but also very skeptical. Ever since Atari bought the rights to the series, things have been going downhill, but I was still optimistic about it. After playing the game, I was extremely disappointed. The normal Roller Coaster Tycoon games consist of park management, while this new VR one has you making and riding roller coasters. And while I'm not against this idea, I wasn't a huge fan of it either. They couldn't even do that part right. The coaster creation is pretty good, but riding them is terrible. It's slow, and they added gun mechanics, which seem like they're in there because they thought the coaster itself wouldn't be fun. The game has a lot of glitches too. The only bit of fun I had in the game was when I made all the tracks boost tracks. The game is just not good, and really disappointing as a big fan of the series.
Crisis of the Planet of the Apes. When first getting my PSVR, Crisis of the Planet of the Apes was my most anticipated title, as I'm a huge fan of the most recent trilogy. It was such a letdown to see how this game turned out. While the climbing mechanic worked relatively well, allowing you to use one arm to peek over ledges or around corners while firing your gun with the other, the actual firefights were lackluster, and the guns themselves seemed to lack true realism in use and visual appeal. Possibly the most disappointing factor, however, was the movement scheme itself. While swinging each arm like an ape was a cool idea in concept, the execution suffered dramatically as movement was not free and completely story-driven. Top this off with about an hour, maybe two at best, worth of gameplay, and you have one large disappointing title for PSVR.
And those were our most disappointing games of 2018. While we had so many good titles last year, we also had many bad and disappointing ones. Here's hoping this year will be the best one for PSVR.